Here we go. Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Casey. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the policy analyst here at Detroit Disability Power. A quick visual description. I'm a young, mid-20s white femme presenting person. I have some little red heart earrings and a little choker and a white tank top. And behind me, you can see most of my apartment, including a kitchen. And before we get started, we're going to run through an access check. So Rami's going to share their screen. Okay, so for those of you who've been with us before, this might look a little familiar, so we're going to walk through it before we get started. This is all about creating access together. So first of all, as I just said, we'll be recording the beginning portion in the panel of this event. During that time and throughout the event, please feel free to stay on mute when not speaking to minimize background noise. Along with that, please wait until someone is done talking to speak. And when you do unmute to speak, please begin by saying this is and then your name so we can capture that for captions, and our ASL interpreters can record that or communicate that as well. We'll be using the chat pretty minimally tonight, so please only use the chat if you have an urgent question and if you are able to message someone directly. So if you need tech support, again, feel free to message myself. Next, on the right side of the slide we're looking at, we're going to break if access stops. So if at any time you can no longer participate and engage in this event for whatever reason, again, please feel free to either message privately or come off mute if that is easier for anyone. And then we also have CART available tonight. So that's someone who's doing live captions. And if you would like to view those captions, you can click on the CC at the bottom right of your screen and enable the captions. Also, a quick note to be mindful of the ASL interpreter. When you are speaking, please speak slow and clearly and state your name prior to speaking so they can capture everything that you're communicating. And then finally, we'd love it if you keep your cameras on. We love seeing all of your beautiful faces. And with that, we will stop sharing screen. And we are almost ready to get started for today's event. So, like I said, my name is Casey. I'm the policy analyst at DDP, and I'm so thankful, and I speak on behalf of the whole team, that we're thankful to have you here. We're excited to have yet another round of community conversations after last year's, where we hosted on the topics of racism, ableism, and ageism. You all let us know that those were things that you wanted to see more of. So here we are today in June of 22, kicking off this year's series. So this is the first of two community conversations. So yay to that. It's all about queer pride and disability, as you know. And next month on Tuesday, July 19th from 6 to 7:30, we'll be hosting the second installment of this series. So go ahead and mark your calendars and RSVP. The July conversation is all about developing an intersectional disability justice politics. So check out the link in the chat that Rami's about to drop and RSVP for that event as well. Before I pass things over to our panel moderator today, I want to just quickly give you a rundown of our agenda. In a second, Rami, our chat moderator, will kick things off by introducing our panelists, and then we'll move directly into that discussion. Then about at 7:05, we will start the Q&A portion. So if you can, drop your questions in the chat as they come up, or you can wait until the Q&A portion. Either way, they won't be answered until the end, just as an FYI. In addition, if the chat is not accessible to you, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom during the Q&A to ask your question verbally. And remember, try to only use the chat for Q&A so it's not consistently interrupting screen readers. And if the chat isn't something you can use, you can just come off mute, as I said before. All right. Any questions? We'll pause here, or if you are having any access issues and want to note them verbally, please do so now. This is Casey. I'm seeing lots of neutral faces and nothing's coming through in the chat quite yet. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Rami. and welcome you all again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rami, and I'm the community organizer for Detroit Disability Power. I use he and they pronouns. I am a light brown 30-year-old non-binary person with facial hair, glasses, and short black hair, sitting in front of a Zoom blurred background. Thanks so much for coming. If I can take a moment up top to be a little vulnerable as the organizer for this event. Not the sole organizer though, because Casey's helped a lot. I just want to say that I've personally needed an event like this, events like these for a very long time. As a non-binary Latina, HIV positive and disabled person living in Detroit, I've needed people like this gathering on issues like this. So I want to thank my coworkers at DDP, but our members especially for making this kind of work possible. To be a little bit more vulnerable, June 14th is the anniversary of my HIV diagnosis. We didn't plan that on purpose, it's just a coincidence. But on that day, several years back when I was diagnosed, many wheels started turning to make sure that I had what I needed medically, mentally, spiritually, just everything. I tapped into systems of healthcare, but also systems of support and love. So I'm really grateful for the overwhelming and positive journey I've had through this diagnosis from family and friends, but also working here. So I dedicate this event to my HIV positive ancestors, my queer elders that aren't here, and all that cared for them, for us. I live my life with not a shred of stigma and with a lot of pride for them and in their honor. So if we can take just 4 deep collective deep breaths as a way to honor those that have been prematurely taken from us, we can do that now. So I will guide us. Let's take 1 deep breath. Exhale. Another deep breath. Exhale. 3rd one. And the last one, make it count. Okay, cool. I also needed a bit of a reset. I've been working all day and trying to transition my energies here. So thank you, folks. Okay, so enough about me. Let's get to why we are here. We're here to take in the lived genius and lived wisdom of our 4 amazing panelists. I'll give a brief intro to each, but then they can tell you a bit more about themselves once we get into the moderated portion. So let's start in alphabetical order with Ashley Hunter. Ashley is a native Detroiter, proud product of Detroit Public Schools, a parent, a classically trained opera singer, and a Master's of Music candidate graduating this fall from Wayne State University. Yay to that. Ashley loves her city, especially its youth, and does everything in her power while working in DPS schools to make sure students feel empowered, accepted, and appreciated. So thank you for being here, Ashley. And up next, we have Chris Sutton, who says describing themselves is never easy, but for the most part, they are cool, calm, and collected person. They are a military veteran, and their pronouns are me, my, and self, which means you can call them using she, her, or they, just don't call him late for Sunday dinner. And up next, we have Dr. Shanna Qatari, who is a white, Jewish, non-binary, disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent, polyamorous, queer fat femme, practicing community, and their practice and community background is as a board-certified sexologist, certified sexuality educator, and social justice advocate. Dr. Qatari's extent research focuses on understanding how power, privilege, and oppression systematically marginalize, exclude, and discriminate against people regarding their identities, expressions, through negative attitudes, policies reinforcing oppression, oppressive actions, and isolation. And last but not least, we have Tay Brown, Tay was born and raised in Hamtramck, Michigan, but is currently attending Michigan State University, where he is studying community governance and advocacy with a minor in peace and justice. Tay is the social justice engineer for the LGBT Detroit Leadership Academy, which provides professional development, support, and dynamic education centered on HIV stigma to LGBT plus young adults. Tay is passionate about finding new and compelling ways to stimulate community minds regarding issues impacting the LGBT plus community and aims to bring youth and young adults together to solve their problems. Thank you, panelists, so much for being here. Let's jump in with a question for every panelist. We'll start with Ashley, then go to Chris, then Shanna, then Tay, in the same order that we did the intros. So if you could just say your name for us again, your pronouns, and talk to us about pride. It's a word that you'll see or hear a lot this month. Pride can be a difficult thing to cultivate, especially if one carries marginalized or stigmatized labels. So how do you personally promote the development of pride in yourself and in your communities? Or maybe you can tell us what pride looks like to you. So hand it over to you, Ashley.
All righty. Hi, everyone. This is Ashley speaking. Of course, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a Black femme presenting person. My hair is up in a bun, and my background is blurred because we're painting in my house. So I don't want y'all to see my paint. So pride for me is a little difficult to describe just because pride was not always comfortable for me. Just because growing up in my home, I heard my extremely homophobic father speak to one of my friends when I was maybe about 12 or 13 at the time. And he said some outlandish things. Mind you, my queer young self was just very surprised. And I was like, oh, okay, well, never coming out ever. I'll be in the closet for a long time. But lo and behold, that long time was maybe about a week. So pride for me is bittersweet just because I had to figure out what pride meant to me personally. And it really just means love and acceptance and mainly freedom to be who I want to be, to do what I want to do, and, you know, be out here no matter what anyone says or thinks about me. And that's pride.
This is Rami. Thank you. Thank you. That was a very beautiful answer. I'm sure relatable to a lot of people here and points to how like early our queer development is happening and starting. So thank you, Ashley. Let's hear from Chris. Chris, tell us about your relationship to the word pride and how you cultivate that in the spaces you occupy.
Okay. Hi, my name is Christopher Sutton, or Chris Shannon, or Chris Sutton. I'm Chris. Hi. My pronouns are me, my, and self. What I mean by that is truly, I believe in just taking care of self, and honestly knowing who you are. I'm male presenting or masculine presenting. Today I have on a green shirt. I have a beige background because I'm still at work in one of our conference rooms. So just to speak to you all. When I think about the word pride, the first thing that always comes to my mind is Think by Aretha Franklin, or the song that goes, that has the word pride in the back. I'm sorry, A Deeper Love, not Think. A Deeper Love by Aretha Franklin. But because it's literally about getting out of bed and doing whatever you have to do to get through the day and take pride in yourself. And honestly, learning the community and loving the community for what they are, but understanding that sometimes people don't understand you. So you have to really embrace it, but also affect change too. So taking the time to really understanding that you can have a different background, or you can go through your own life and your own trials, but you still have the ability to be yourself.
This is Rami. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, your answer really points to the many ways that pride is not a thing that happens independently or individually, but in a community that greatly informs our process of developing pride. I'm going to try not to be like too responsive to everyone's questions so we can get through these, but you all are already really piquing our interest here. Let's go to Shanna, and same question for you. How do you cultivate pride in the spaces you're in, despite how challenging it might be?
Yeah, this is Shanna, or Dr. K, as my students know me. And you see a white, non-binary femme with curly hair, half of which is shaved. This is new, so that is part of my pride this summer. Wearing bright red lipstick, some funky glasses, earrings that say accessibility is love, a rainbow necklace, a blue, purple, and gray mottled shirt. And in the background, it looks very busy, but I know exactly where everything is. And there is a lot of rainbows and disability stuff and dinosaurs and cat curtains and even a cat underneath the cat curtains. So that's what you're getting today. You know, I think when I first hear the word pride, it's been so tied into queer and trans community. And I want to flip that a little bit and talk about my experience with disability pride, because to me, they're not separable. And I came out as autistic, and I use the term coming out very intentionally, because as an academic, there's not very many out autistic academics, and there's a lot of stigma that goes with that. And particularly not a lot of autistic academics that don't look like people who are really good at math or science or programming. And so for me, being autistic and being comfortable in that and asking for my needs, being able to use STEM toys, I'm holding up a little tentacle toy in academic spaces and other places, has allowed me to then better explore my gender. And to figure out what that looked like for me as a non-binary person. It has allowed me to do better in asking for my other disability needs to be met. I figure if people are already not going to like how I communicate, then I can say, actually, I do need captions, and I need an ice pack, and I need to be able to work from home. And I need you to wear masks, and I need you to not be in big communities of folks and spreading COVID because I'm immunocompromised. And so to me, pride is accepting pieces of yourself, but also advocating for and being an activist for yourself and your community. You know, it's more than rainbow capitalism, and it's more than even just queerness and transness. There's a piece of it for me that's about the self-love and ditching the stigma and really asking for your needs and doing so unapologetically.
Thank you. This is Rami. Snaps to that. I really appreciate some things you said that we're definitely going to have to cycle back to, and it's about outness and, you know, the choice to publicly, publicly is a different word for different people, but to outwardly identify as something comes with potentially an access to pride, but potentially also some, setbacks. Visibility is sometimes dangerous for disabled people, queer and trans people. So thank you. We'll be digging into a couple of the things you said there. But let's hear from Tay right now. You know the question, Tay. You've heard 3 people answer it. What does pride mean to you? What does it look like? How do you cultivate it?
Hey, what up, though, everybody? Name is Tay Brown. Pronouns are he, him, and bro. Hope everybody is doing well tonight, y'all. So for me, being someone who's like new to the scene and working in LGBT spaces, to me, pride is about being your authentic self and showing up as your authentic self. And people would say that to me all the time. like, yeah, just, show up as Tay, as whoever Tay wants to be. And I never really got like, okay, what do you mean? Like, I am showing up as myself. But, something I realized over the years is that, I was always like hiding like certain like pieces and parts of myself. Maybe part of that was because, I'm Black and a gay man. And I know that there's certain targets on my back. Sometimes it makes me think back to when I was like a young kid, and I remember, my mom watching me or catching me watching some, gay porn scenes, right? And saying that, I hope that this isn't the kind of stuff that you into. And really just suppressing like that whole part of like my identity for so many years. And so for me, being in the position that I'm currently in today, it's really about making sure that the folks around me feel cool and feel comfortable in themselves, their whole selves, and can be their true authentic selves. And what I mean by that is no matter who you are, no matter how you decide to express that, how you decide to show that, baby, bring it. You feel me? Because at the end of the day, we're all who we got. And so pride is also about community. It's about unity, and it's about love and respect. And that's something that I look forward to bringing to like every space that I'm in, to make sure that we all feel comfortable and can feel safe.
This is Rami. Thank you so much, Tay. That was very beautifully put. I'm gonna go. I want to ask a question that seems to be like precipitating on this. It's not one that we prepared, so just to be clear. But several of you have touched on outness. I mentioned earlier how Dr. K was, talking about their experiences coming out as autistic in academia, and how that has allowed them to ask for what they need. Ashley shared a bit about how, she had that moment as a young person where she was like, I'm never coming out. And Tay identified the ways in which like multiply marginalized identities put several targets on one's back. I think target was the word you used. So for any panelist that wants to take this one, but would be happy to hear from any of you. Can you complicate outness for us, or tell us about your relationship to being out? Do you see it as a necessity for people in the queer community, as something that's as accessible to one member of the queer community as it is to another member? What are your thoughts on outness? Is that a hand? Chris, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just start talking. But yes. Please.
Well. So I typically have this conversation with a lot of my friends and a lot of people inside the community, and we're always talking about what is it to be out. So sometimes, especially in the African American community, it's not the safest thing to be out out with your family, because many times you can lose it. You can lose them, or depending on your religious reasons, there's a lot of different ways when you say pride. Sometimes your pride, because if we look at the word pride and we think about lions, the pride is the group of the family of the lions. And if we say, who's your pride and what type of pride do you have? We can also look at the family and people that we create and the people that are around us. Like if I'm going through a bad day, Tay could be my brother, Ashley could be my sister. And therefore they may not physically be or biologically related to me, but they're truly my pride. So coming out has always been one of those things, because I joined the military when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a thing. I'm actually the person in Between the Lines, and Between the Lines is a local newspaper. And I didn't want to use my name or anything because I was still afraid about the backlash that would happen inside the community if I said Christopher Sutton. So, in talking about being queer or being gay or being LGBTQIA and the rest of the alphabet soup, it'd be in the military. So it's a pretty cool thing, but it's also one of those things that it depends on your community, and it depends on how open and honest you are with yourself.
This is Rami. Thank you, Chris. You are right. Like coming out as queer for those of us in I mean, I don't, we can't speak to every community of color, but you've said you're Black, I'm Mexican, and it's not in every Black family or in every Mexican family, but there is a feeling of a gamble, right? Like a bit of a trade-off. I get my outness, but do I lose, you know, some family? But thank you for also pointing out that chosen family is there as well for those of us that put in the work to cultivate it. And in your example there, you know, you said Ashley and Tay could be like that sort of chosen family. So thank you for reminding us of that. And also your answer reminds me that like outness is a revolving door, right? Like it's not a closet that you step out of and then you're just out of. Like sometimes you go back in, you know, for a little while, spend some time. Maybe you don't put your name on that publication, but
one foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah, this is Robbie. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if it's a door, it can go both ways, you know? So thank you for adding that nuance there. What about, yes, Dr. K?
Just call me Shanna, please. Yeah, so I really appreciate the reminder that outness is an ongoing process, right? Both because your own identities might change, but I also think about as a non-binary femme who both of my partners are trans masculine bearded types, is that when either of us are out and about, we read as straight, and I put that in quotation marks. And similarly, as a disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent person, if I'm not actively using my cane, I get read as non-disabled. You know, and so I have a disability placard on my car, and I've gotten yelled at in parking lots around that. And so, you know, it's an interesting conversation of both what people would call passing privilege, although also challenging because then you're sometimes rejected by your own communities, while also having this like weird implicit ableism and homophobia and queerphobia and femphobia and transphobia that's happening because people feel comfortable to say those things in front of me, right? Or like somebody says like, you go girl, and that's not right for my gender, but because I look femme, I don't know if I can like push back on that and how safe that is. And so, you know, to me, the idea of outness is it's a constant conversation, and how out do I want to be? Right? Like, I'm okay saying I'm disabled. Is it going to be comfortable saying I'm autistic? It's okay saying, you know, that I'm queer, that like that's more acceptable, but trying to explain what a non-binary femme is takes, you know, it's the cashier at the grocery store. Is it worth this conversation? And so it's a constant tension and negotiation. And it's something that people should never feel like they have to do and should never be forced to do. And, right, lots of ands. I think it's a gift to ourselves and a gift to our communities when we're able to come out in any way, right? Whether it's with a pseudonym in a publication, but to let other folks know that you exist, whether it's to our family or our chosen family, a group of friends, that is a gift, whether it's just to yourself, and to have spent that time and energy to say, like, I own this piece of myself and I see me, right? Like those are all gifts. And when we create them in other spaces, you know, I think about, I'm really delighted to have 3 Black panelists because disability spaces are so white. And so to be able to see Black, queer, disabled folks, or the language that you use for yourselves, I apologize if I'm stepping on toes, you know, I'm like, yes, like I wanted my students to come to this because, right, my experience is so different, and as is everyone else's, and to say to them, like, you're not alone, like you are part of this, as Chris was saying, this larger community, this pride. And, you know, like that's the importance of outness. And so while nobody should have to do it, what happens is that the most privileged people, so upper middle class, white, cisgender, US citizen, heterosexual, Christian folks come out, and that's the only visuals we see, so that it makes it harder for the rest of us to then say, do I belong? Like, can I claim my queerness? Can I claim my gayness if I don't wear a suit and have a picket fence and 2.5 children? You know, and so I think there's this constant tension of like, is it for myself? Is it for others? Is it safe? Is it not? Does it matter? Does it not? And so it's just this constant like pinball machine of where do I choose to be out, when, and how.
This is Rami. Oof, thank you. That was rich. It it is exhausting. Like I don't know about for y'all, but like that negotiation of where I'm out, how much I'm out, it is very exhausting. So thank you for just naming that, and also for naming. Well, I think I named the exhausting part a little more than you did, but thank you for naming like the fact that it not only is it a revolving door, but different identities become salient to us at different times, like you said. And with disability, that's especially the case because my disability was something that came later to me. You know, like it wasn't something that came at the exact same time as my queerness. So as things compound, you know, they become a lot to manage. Also, your comments made me think of like that whole like I'm not disabled enough or I'm not queer enough, and like that word like enough of like I don't look like the disabled people that I see on mainstream media. I don't look like the queer people I see on mainstream media. So am I really that? You know, and do I want to be that? These are questions that maybe Ashley can tackle for us. So Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about outness? And I know that you've disclosed to me that we're comfortable here that you have an invisible disability, or like not one that's readily, you know, visible to someone else. So tell me a little bit about your experience with your disability and your queerness and outness.
Thank you, definitely. So I have ADHD, and with my ADHD, I have an audio processing disorder. So when people, well, for the audio processing disorder, I'll give you an example of what that feels like for me. So when someone is giving me directions, like telling me something to do, and it's a lot of things, I cannot. You have to write it down for me, or else I am not going to remember anything you said in the beginning. For example, when Rami asked a question previously about, I can't even remember what it was, but I was just like, okay, I hope he doesn't come to me because I don't remember what the question was. But of course, it's not your fault, Rami. I promise. I was just going to ask, can you repeat the question if you did? But yes, my ADHD, I take medication for it. Just because I cannot function well without it. So I needed to focus on, you know, my work. I needed to clean my house. I needed to get up out of the bed in the morning and take care of my toddler. So yes, that's my invisible disability. And, you know, people in academia, which I found that out because I am recently diagnosed, even though I knew I had this for a long time. People don't give you very many, you know, options. A lot of accessibility to, let's say, me needing longer to finish a test or something, or bolding certain things on typed documents, because when I was younger, I used to run through books like crazy, like big, thick books, maybe in about 2 days. But now it's very, very hard for me to sit down and focus and actually read something for long periods of time. I learned that the hard way because, like Rami mentioned, I'm a master's student right now. And my first semester of being a grad student was rough, just because I didn't have my medication at the time and I didn't know what to do. I'm trying so hard to finish all these projects and get everything done, but I am a grade A procrastinator. I literally will not start a 20-page paper until it's the day before and somehow make diamonds out of dust. But yeah, I was tired of doing that. So I got diagnosed, and I'm happy that I did, because man, things are so much easier now that my brain is not foggy and running on a pencil and one walnut. So yes, that's me living my life with this invisible disability.
This is Rami. Thank you. And actually, just out of curiosity, is your ADHD something you're out like, is this something you carry with you in your academic spaces? Do you communicate that and get your access needs met at Wayne?
At first, I didn't, just because I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed of asking for help, period. Just because I didn't think that I would be able to get help, because I just felt like, oh, it's just ADHD. You know, people aren't going to make any type of arrangements for me. But I had a professor who is awesome that I'm actually taking again next semester, and I can't wait. He was like, hey, you're having some issues with the readings I remember you mentioned. Is there something going on, or is there some way that I can help you with it? And I met with him on the side, and I told him, I was like, yeah, I have ADHD, and I just need some extra help, or some extra time with some things. And he was just like, hey, don't be afraid to tell me that, or to remind me of that next time, just because I want to make sure that you have the best toolbox that you can get in order to get through my class, because it was dense readings and no homework but the readings, and then a 20-page paper at the end. So that was difficult for me. But he just reminded me to advocate for myself, and to be sure to let everybody know, like, hey, I just need a little bit of extra help. It's not a big deal. And a lot of my professors have been very accommodating. So I learned it the hard way.
This is Rami. Thank you for sharing a positive story of like a person of color, especially a woman of color, especially a Black woman, like getting the diagnosis we deserve. It's chronically underdiagnosed. I don't know if folks know, but ADHD is chronically underdiagnosed in young girls, or people assigned girl at birth, and in people of color, because our behaviors are just demonized and vilified and not seen as like maybe symptoms worth compassion and evaluation and things of this nature. And I also want to thank you for your candidness about struggling with school. I mean, just to be selfish, that really helps me to hear. I have ADHD as well. I was diagnosed late, about 2 years ago. And late meaning what? You know, like, well, it came when it came. But it took me 7 years to graduate undergrad, because I have like such a tough time reading, and could never take like a full credit load. Like had to part-time it all the way through just to like do what I needed to do. But thank you for really making that word embarrassed salient, especially in disability spaces. One of the reasons we at DDP try to just meet access needs without folks having to ask for them specifically is to sort of like take that off the shoulders of every individual who has to like if you're deaf and you want to go to an event and there's no clear indication of access on the flyer or in the email or on the website, you have to do the work of like, who do I email? Who do I contact to ask them what the access accommodations are? And then most of the times you're gonna get back like, we have none, you know? So thank you, because I think that shame that keeps us from asking for what we need, whether that be a need that stems from our queerness or a need that stems from our disability, the ability to do that takes pride, right? Like it takes some sort of entitlement, like I belong in this space and I belong like comfortably. And some of us come from cultures where maybe humility is stressed a lot more than pride or than public pride. I know that's the case for me, but we are also not here to discuss me. Before we move to another question, does any of the other panelists or any panelists want to speak a little bit more to outness or the impact of outness in their own life? It's okay if we want to move on. Okay, yes.
I think you called me out right, didn't you, Ron? Hey, no worries, boss, no worries. I think for me, and we already touched on it, but I think it is interesting to see just like how like we spoke about before, you can go in and out of that closet. It's that revolving door. I know, like for me, as someone that does identify as gay, but then it's also diagnosed with HIV, I found myself like really like going in and out of that door like it was Macy's during the holiday season, baby. Yes, there's this one side of me where yes, I'm open and I'm gay and I'm proud, but then because probably it was new, being diagnosed, it kind of really just like brought me back in for a little bit. And I really want to like share that with folks, like that whole 9 yards. And so for me, I had to realize the reason as to like why that was really happening. And for me, it was because of the stigmatization, right? And really that came internal from like myself. It really didn't come from others. And what I found was as I became more open with folks slowly but surely about this new reality of my life, I found that not only were folks more understanding and willing to like want to learn more, but it really just showed the fact of how I was really placing the stigma like on myself. And so for me, I understand that sometimes in this closet or sometimes being out isn't something that you can always do immediately in the moment. It comes in stages, right? And it comes with learning and it comes with growth. And so depending on where you are, that may dictate whether you are in or out, whatever that looks like. But I don't think that we should ever shame folks depending on like where they are in life, right? We should be supportive of them, understanding, and find ways to support.
This is Rami. Thank you, Tay, so much for that. Your answer really points out the ways in which not all identities, it's not as easy to be proud of every identity as it is the other. So for example, my Mexican identity or anyone's racial identity, well, maybe except if you're white, but like anyone else's racial identity, there's like an encouragement to be proud of it. Like in the home, I was told like, you should be proud to be brown, you should be proud to be Mexican. It's a great thing. Like that about yourself. And I've been blessed to grow up during the time that I did, where there was a little bit more about that regarding queerness. Like in high school, I was able to be out. I had educators who were like, that's okay, that's great. With disability though,
this is Casey. It looks like Rami's internet is frozen. Rami, can you hear us? All right. Well, we will let Rami finish that talk when they pop back in here in a moment. This is Casey. Tay, if you want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about how you've seen HIV treatment and prevention and awareness kind of change over the past few years, whether that's related to the pandemic, how much it's talked about during, Pride. It looks like Chris has their hand up too. So maybe we'll popcorn to Chris after you, Tay.
Gotcha. So this is Tay. And what I've seen like so far, at least like throughout the pandemic, is definitely, I've been seeing like these new messages about mixed relationships, and just really trying to break down the stigma that those that may be living with the diagnosis wouldn't be able to achieve like love or a relationship, companionship, whatever that looks like for you with someone that does not have a diagnosis. And I'm a living testimony to that fact for me to be living with HIV and for my partner not to be living with HIV. One really just shows how well we communicate, how well we like really like plan like our relationship to work out, even in the midst of like this challenge. Because at the end of the day, it's about our love. And as long as we can find the right tools to overcome that, then nothing can stop us, nor the love that we have for one another. And that's something that I truly love. I think though, what is really interesting about the pandemic is because where a lot of people felt that, or where we found that it was hard to do outreach, to get testing done, to get folks in for testing, et cetera, we actually found the opposite. We're finding these new creative ways to ensure that folks are in control of their health, aware of their health, and find ways that you can actually do that at home. I think that's all what the pandemic was about, right? We was working from home, we was ordering from home, and now we're able to find ways for folks to even get tested for HIV at home, amongst other diseases and infections. And I think that's been actually a really powerful tool as we move forward with the work and ending the epidemic, is that folks are being able to take more control over their status, being aware of that, and being able to be aware of what the appropriate steps are, what are the resources, to remain in good health. And so I think that that's been like really amazing throughout the time of the pandemic, is that we still been able to keep that momentum going. But Chris, what you want to say?
So before I did what I did now, and before my last position, I worked in HIV for 15 years. So I started off as a volunteer and moved my way up through many different programs, and ended working with the city. The one thing I can say is access to care has completely changed. The stigma or the ability not to be in care from when I started versus now has completely changed, just because of the Affordable Care Act. Then the other part about it is, during the pandemic, we did not see a spike in new HIV diagnosis, which we thought we were, because people didn't have access to care. There wasn't a spike. Actually, everything pretty much stayed where it was, and normal. Well, normal. But it was a really, really good sign that the way we're treating people and the way people are taking care of themselves, they're doing everything better and right, quote unquote. And what Tay was referring to is something called U equals U. So in 2015, I can't remember who did it, but at the World HIV Conference, they introduced a study called U equals U, which means that undetectable means equals untransmittable. And that's what Tay is referring to, his partner being negative and him being positive, and having a serodiscordant couple that actually have a relationship and be able to have sex or live with each other. So it's actually a pretty cool study. But if you ever want to look it up, it's called U equals U, and it's by AMFAR.
This is Robbie. Just want to say sorry for the internet glitching out on me, but really grateful that I have a team that can just pick it up and have it rolling. I saw, Shanna, your hand up, I think. You want to add something?
Yeah, this is Shanna. I wanted to bring back again to that intersection place of queerness and disability and stigma that some folks have talked about. Is I have tenure now, so I can say this. At the beginning, I know, right? They don't know what's coming. At the beginning of or middle of the first year of the pandemic, pre-vaccines, pre-everything, the president of when talking about the decision to not test students on campus, said, sometimes testing can give you a false sense of security. That happened in the HIV epidemic when people got a negative test and they presented it to their sex partners and spread disease nonetheless. Right, yes, all of those eyeballs that are happening. And so it bring, like, I think when we talk about disability, we talk about queerness, we talk like what we've seen with the HIV crisis, but also like the movement in response to it is such a scrappy queer way of navigating things, right? Like the government was like, yeah, this is your own problem. The stigma came with it. And, you know, Tay was talking about these amazing technologies and creative ways to get there. Like to me, that's queering health, right? Is like, oh, you're not gonna, you know, make space for us. You're not gonna find ways to support us. You're not gonna like expand your testing. Like, cool, we're gonna do this. You know, as Chris was talking with U equals U, like the idea that folks who are living with HIV should never have a partner who's not, right? Like that's just not reasonable. But instead of doing anything about it, the queer community had to say, all right, this is how we're going to navigate this. And it's queer researchers having those conversations. And I think we're seeing this with the disability community, especially right now with pandemic response, of like, oh, you don't care about us, right? Like everybody's going back in person. They're going back without masks. Zoom meetings, which made things so accessible for folks, are getting turned back into in-person meetings. And so it's, again, the disability community that's doing community care, that's doing mutual aid, that's getting scrappy. And I feel like oftentimes we talk about HIV as separate from disability, and we talk about queerness as separate from all of these things. And I think that the stigmatization looks very similar, the societal reaction, but then also this like brilliance that an innovation that comes from the community that says like, how do we take care of us? And I just really wanted to frame that because I was hearing that from Tay and Chris, and I love that part of us.
This is Rami. Yeah, it's in HIV positive spaces, queer spaces, especially spaces where queer people of color are, and in disability spaces where I've seen the strongest displays of self-love and of self-advocacy and community love. Thank you so much for bringing that up. On this same thread, but also like broadening the issue a little bit more to talk about this word healthy. So we have, a lot of like anecdotes from the 80s and 90s that tell us that at that time, right after the AIDS epidemic, members of our community became obsessed with presenting healthy and with presenting fit because we wanted to signal to one another that we were not, that we did not have HIV, that we were healthy. And now, in 2022, this idea of like who is healthy and what healthy looks like is really coming back up in a serious way with COVID and with this new word that's part of everyone's lexicon, comorbidity. So to start with anyone that wants to really, how does this history and the present day of this relationship to the healthy body show up in your work? How do you unpack it in yourselves? And what is your take on this current conversation about health and what that looks like, especially when it comes to like body size and age and disability?
Can we back up for a second?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so what most people don't realize, and this might be getting a little too sciencey, but HIV is a RNA disease. COVID is an RNA disease. One of the reasons why Pfizer and the other companies worked so quickly to get a COVID vaccine is because they've been working on the HIV vaccine for the last 12 years. And what a lot of people don't know is the same research that went into finding that's been used for the HIV vaccine has actually been used to make the COVID vaccines, and that's why they're so effective right now. And that's why, because when we're talking about the way that a disease changes and the way that the virus mutates and things like that, we can also look at COVID. We can also look at COVID and also compare it to HIV. Earlier, you talked about one of the cool things about June. On June 27th, that's National HIV Test Day. So what that means is, hey, if you don't know your status, please go get tested. But don't just get tested for HIV. Get tested for all STDs and STIs too. The other thing I wanted to now move a little bit more forward is when we talk about comorbidity, that word, because I have a speech impediment too. We look at what do you have with something else. So when they're talking about comorbidity, I can't say the word, but they're usually talking about COVID and heart disease, COVID and this, COVID and that. But they're not talking, but when we talk about it in our world, we talk about HIV and syphilis, or HIV and mental health, or something else. And what we all have to remember is there's always something else going on. COVID, is starting. COVID is one of the few things that is not a social economical disease, but HIV is. If you look at the communities that it affects, it generally affects communities that look like you, Rami, you, Tay, but it doesn't really affect some of our other counterparts. So we have to look at what we're doing and how we're working with each other to really figure out some of the things that's going on. I'm sorry to take it so far off the topic, but yeah.
This is Rami. No, Chris, that is great. And I really appreciate, first of all, the science that you all are bringing here, like teaching me a couple of things here. But thank you for pointing out the way in which like your experience with the disability or chronic illness is area based, and it changes from where you are, and it is like a racialized circumstance, as well as an economic one. Which kind of, I know I posed a question earlier, but I want to, like, this is also a really good segue to something I want to ask Ashley, which is about Detroit. So as we're talking about like localities and the where of what we're going through is happening, Ashley, what has growing up in Detroit taught you about being queer and disabled? Or like, you know, just in general, what has Detroit offered you that pushes you forward?
Absolutely. So besides the obvious, LGBT Detroit, Detroit as a city is pretty welcoming of the gays. I won't hold you. Here and there have been, you know, some bad experiences. Oh, by the way, I did not even mention this. I'm a bisexual woman. And honestly, I haven't had like super wild experiences while I was dating, you know, a femme presenting partner. Now, if I were to go outside of Detroit city limits, then that's another question. But maybe, like Tay said, I had that target on my back just because of the color of my skin. But I mean, hey, I can't wipe this off. So that was that. But anywho, Detroit has been very welcoming to queer people such as myself, who was unsure of their queerness for a long time, even though I was sure, but at the same time, a lot of the straight, just everything had me confused, because that's how we see everything in the straight lens. But yeah, Detroit as a queer environment has been very welcoming to myself. I want to give a shout out to Tay I reached out to him about LGBT Detroit, and he was like, yeah, come on, let's talk about it. And yeah, I love my city and how it loves me back.
This is Rami. Oh, I get gushy about Detroit too. My family immigrated from Mexico, and this is the only city we've known in the US. So it's a lovely city. And I echo that experience. I've had a very positive experience being queer in Detroit. I'm getting nervous the second I step outside our city limits. So I know that we plan to start Q&A in about 3 minutes. We are going to take the moderated questions a little longer, but audience members, please start queuing up your questions for any of our panelists. If you would like to anonymously, well, sort of anonymously submit a question, you can send it to either Casey or I. I know some folks have done that. So if you're more comfortable with that, we won't read your name. But speaking of Detroit, let's move a little bit over to our neighboring city of Ann Arbor, because there's some questions I really want to ask Shanna here. I know that you are a social work professor, and social workers interact greatly with HIV positive populations, disabled populations, queer people, whether it be in like macro or micro. What is some advice that you have for aspiring social workers that will help them maintain deep alliances with the communities they serve and not the powers that maintain the status quo?
This is Shanna. Yeah, what a question. Well, first of all, I think social work as a movement has its own reckoning we need to deal with. At the same time as everything else, we've been doing as a field more work and conversation about racial justice, about our history, and sometimes currentness in partnering with police and what that looks like. But historically, we have not had a lot of conversation around queerness, transness, or disability. And that is with social workers, I would say, serving more disabled folks than almost any other position. When you think about veterans, when you think about older adults, when you think about youth, when you think about folks in residential treatment, right? Like we serve a lot of disabled folks, but we don't talk about it. You know, I think about how slow our field was to respond to the edict in Texas that actually put the onus on social workers to investigate parents providing gender affirming care to their young or their children and adolescents, right? And the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, the bill in Idaho, all across the US. I think there's been 120 anti-trans bills in 2022 alone. So I want to say that some of this is, as a field, we need to do better. And part of that is bringing in, I put in quotations, diverse students. But we can't support diverse students if we don't have better systems and also diverse faculty. So it's always a bit of a catch-22. And I just wanted to name a lot of the challenges with social work and the history of it being created by well-intentioned white lady, white savior types. That being said, I think one of the biggest pieces is to remind social workers that no one is inherently a micro social worker or a macro social worker, that we all have to be ready to engage at the micro, meso, and macro level. And so micro is that interpersonal piece. So that's like you and I having a conversation. That's like me offering therapy to Casey. You know, that's like a talk in the office. And meso is those groups, those smaller organizations, right? And that's how, like, how do we support, for example, DDP, making sure queerness and transness is just as affirmed as disability. And I would also argue that race and immigration status and all of that is just as affirmed. And meso is are those bigger policy shifts, those how do we change institutions like the media? How do we change institutions like the military industrial complex and whether they care for their folks or not, and who is allowed in and not, and what do military social workers do? But it also is, it's policy at the school board level. It's policy on your local city council. You know, heck, I'm in the fight right now with my HOA about flying a pride flag, right? So it's capital P policy and little p policy. And if we are not aware of all of those levels and we just kind of focus in on only, like, I'm only a clinician or I'm only doing policy, we forget that, you know, oppression is operationalized across the board. So that's the brain piece. The action piece is to listen to your communities, to go volunteer, to go to events, to you know, host spaces for people to share their truth, to have anonymous question boxes or comment boxes, but to really let your community guide you. And what I always finish with is my favorite and also most annoying question for social workers of all time is whenever you're not sure about something, instead of asking someone to educate you, is to just say, oh, what does that look like to you? And it allows someone to share their own words and their own experiences about it rather than play some sort of guessing game. And so, you know, instead of assuming that someone living with HIV is feeling really stigmatized, you can say, oh, you shared that you're living with HIV. Can you tell me what that looks like to you? And perhaps there's going to be pieces of pride around it. Perhaps there's going to be pieces of case management of, I can't access care properly. Perhaps there's going to be psychoeducation around, like, can I have a partner who's not currently living with HIV. But perhaps all you're going to get is, you know what, I'm actually doing really great around this, and I've met this amazing community. And actually what I want to talk about today has nothing to do with that. So those would be kind of my thoughts on how to engage across all of those issues in a snippet.
This is Rami, and a great snippet that was. And I really wanted to have someone like Shanna here name that sort of social work history, because oftentimes the people that I've been sent to when I go into a community center to ask for help, or when I seek some sort of professional support, they have MSW at the end of their name. I don't always have the best experience. So it's important that on the ground, we start to heal that relationship, but the onus is definitely on the social work industrial complex. Chris, I see you coming off mute. Do you want to add a little bit to this before I get to an audience question?
Oh, I was just going to say MSW, men who have sex with women.
No, sorry, Masters of Social Work.
It's the reason why I'm saying that. The reason why I'm saying that is because some people may not know their acronym. Thank
you. Yes. I also confuse MLM and MLM, like men who love men, and multi-level marketing scheme. So LOL to that. Okay, folks. So we have a question in the chat. The person does not want to be named, but please, if anyone else would like to submit their chat, now is the time. So this attendee's question is regarding coming out to family members. Specifically, I am wondering if there's any advice you and the panelists could give on how not to, quote unquote, get inside your own head with worry of what others are going to say or think. And is there a suggestion you have for those struggling with this aspect? Well, thank you for that very honest question.
So you can't. So that's coming out to your family, coming out to anyone is a very personal decision. So you do get in your own head, but before you do anything, try to build a community around you, a pride, to see if you can get help. Also find community spaces that are comfortable for you, somebody that you can talk to. I know when I came out at 16, I did have my best friend, but then I also found community spaces that made me feel comfortable. And finding people that make you feel comfortable sometimes is the easiest thing to do. First, before you talk to your family, because your family, honestly, the reaction is the reaction. And from a person that was kicked out their home, it does happen.
This is Rami. Yeah, thank you for that note about unburdening ourselves from things we can't control. Does anyone else want to give some advice? I also put the question in the chat in case someone has to reread it.
I think to piggyback off of like where Chris was, is I think really understanding and knowing your resources. And I speak from a place for those of Black community, in that knowing that although what's very funny is that as Black people, we're very like democratic. We say that we're all for like liberal rights, things like that, but we can also be the most conservative of folks at times. And gay issues seem to be at the top of that. And so I would recommend, because honestly, you're going to have those thoughts. You're going to have ideas about, oh, it's going to go this way, things like that. And I can't say not have them, because it's natural. It will happen. But I think that you should know what your resources are, so that if there is a bad scenario, you know exactly like what those next steps are. If worst case scenario, let's say that you're not invited back to the home, you know like where you can seek shelter, and you know like what that plan looks like. I also think, and for my advice, is that you give it time as well, and that you give a lot of empathy and understanding with that person that you're speaking with. I know for me personally, one of the most difficult conversations that I have yet to give is with my grandmother. And I know that that'll be difficult because that's from another generation. You know, we know how the old heads are and how they think. And so I understand that we're going to have a conversation, and that may not just be one and done that first time go around. You know, we'll continue to talk. She'll share her spiel. And of course, I'll give mine. And you have to be open to that if you're ready to have that conversation with that person. But obviously you're doing that out of love, right? Because you love them and of course they love you. But you need to be understanding of that as well, that, hey, it's a difference in generations, and that this may not be just a one-time scenario, it may be ongoing.
This is Rami. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think Tay, for at least to me, reminds us that there is no blueprint. There is no map. There is no one way to come out. So it takes really being present, you know? And unfortunately, and thank you to Casey for reminding me of this. If you're disabled and you might need to come out, you have to think about your caregivers. Like, what are my caregivers gonna say or do, especially if they're my parents and I rely on them? So there's also that added, you know, nuance there. The next question in the chat that came.
Could I chime in for a second?
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
this is Shanna. I just wanted to say, I actually, I think that is great advice from both of them. I also am of for me, the coming out process, I'm like, okay, I can be squishier about it with family, but I'm also a little militant about it in some ways. And I'm definitely militant about my partners. And so like, I'm like, my mother and my sister still misgender me sometimes. And like, I'm not very close to them. So that's not a fight I'm willing to, like, my mom is dying, right? Like I'm not at that point. But my partners, like, if my partners had come out to her as non-binary and she was intentionally misgendering them or not supporting them, that would be it, right? Like I told my sister, I was like, if you ever have a gender reveal, like that's the end of our relationship, because I've seen how much it's hurt my partners when those things have happened, right? And so I just want to note that, like, my family of origin has been traumatic in a lot of ways. And so for me, coming out to my family of choice, my friends, my community, my pride, I'm really loving that, Chris, what, you know, your visual of that, like that to me is where I'm like, yes, like the people who care about me will authentically be there for me. And there's still like tensions and conversations and all of that. But I also want to remind folks, like, for some of us, it's also healthy to let go of that which does not serve us. And including sometimes if it's your family of origin, and that's okay too.
Hey everyone, this is Rami. Sorry, my computer froze again, but I had my phone open this time in case it happened as another user, but it came back. So I really appreciate what Shanna said about, and my bit of advice to the asker would be about like having really clear boundaries. That might be a given, but I think it's just worth restating, and knowing that you are allowed to be unwavering about those boundaries. The next question is very specific to Ashley. And that question is, as a parent, what is something that you prioritize in your parenting so that your child has pride in who they are, or the youth you work with?
Absolutely. So my daughter is 16 months. So she, of course, she has her own personality already. Absolutely. But we haven't gotten to the point to where it's like she understands, hey, your mom's queer. But when it comes, I'm letting you know, if that girl tells me that she's queer, I'll be like, queer house. But anyway, yeah, I want my daughter to be whatever she wants to be, do whatever she wants to do, and I'm going to support her no matter what that is, no matter how she identifies. I want her to be happy. So I'm going to make that very clear. And, you know, if the time comes to where if she does come out or anything like that, then the door will never be closed. I hope that she's very comfortable to be like, hey, mom, I'm gay, or hey mom, I'm trans. I'll be like, okay, great, cool. Let's go do some stuff. Let's work on, whatever you want. Sure. So also my students that I teach in DPS, let me tell you, I have made so many kids cry. And I don't mean that in the bad way, I mean in a good way. Just because I've had students identify from whom and any and everywhere from under the sun. And they've always come up to me and said, hey, let's say I'm subbing for maybe 2 or 3 days. Thank you for accepting me for who I am. Thank you for not judging me. Thank you for not coming in here just being a pompous teacher and misgendering me. And I'm like, why would I do that? Like, I apologize. Let me apologize for someone who came in and did that to you, but I promise you I will never, just because I don't want one of my students to have a bad experience with me, because, you know, I might be back. I might be back in another class. I want to come to this school, and if they see me, I want them to say, hey, Miss Hunter, hey, when are you coming back to sub for my class? You know, I want to instill the love that these students might not get from somewhere else, you know, or if they need a hug. Like my favorites are like 4th grade and below, because they just run up and hug you anytime. And I'm a good person for hugs. Give me all the hugs. So I'm trying to instill love into my students constantly, as well as my tiny toddler.
This is Rami. Thank you for your comments, Ashley. I think you healed everyone's inner child a little bit when you said, you know, my child can be whatever they want. I know a lot of us have wanted to hear that, and maybe have. It's just nice to know that parents like you are out there, and educators like you, as someone that used to be a youth organizer. I think it's really important to create those spaces, because that's such a pivotal time. I just want to read a couple of comments from the chat. One was an audience member, Heidi, offered some advice to the anonymous asker about outness, and I'll just read that in the chat for access. Heidi says, in recovery, and I'm guessing recovery maybe could be recovery for addiction, or I'm not sure, but it says, in recovery, we talk about being of service to get out of your head, focusing on the next right thing for me, self-care, and finding support. There is also a saying, what other people think of me is none of my business and has nothing to do with my life. Not sure if that applies or is helpful. And then from the anonymous asker, we received a thank you to you all for answering the question. They say, my utmost respect and thanks to all of you for answering my question and for this very much educational evening. Much appreciation and love for everyone who was a part of making this happen. So thank you to you all. I have one more question that was sent anonymously, and I think we'll, we might close with this one. We'll see. It's a little bit specific, but let's get into it. So they say, I have a question that is similar to the previous one, and not the one about parenting, the one about being out. And that I would like to ask anonymously, yes. I recently realized that I am poly and started practicing ethical non-monogamy. I've shared this only with 2 of my best friends and 2 of my grown-up children. And I think for now, that's everyone I can comfortably share this part of me with. There is an inner conflict that I probably won't ever be able to share this part of myself with my family of origin, as they are very traditional, and it feels like I am not being completely true to myself. Any advice on dealing with the inner conflict? We really have you all here as a role of healers today, panelists. Step in on that.
Can I speak to this? This is Shanna. So as a polyamorous, or I use non-monogamy, you know, this was one of my identities. You've heard my list that Rami read at the beginning. I think it's always important to lead with who's talking or who's in the front of a space. And I never used my polyamory one. And then I had a student, my first year teaching at UM, who would come up to my office hours every week just to chat. And one week, she had turned in her self-reflection, and she mentioned in it that she was polyamorous and felt really alone in our social work program. And, you know, I wrote back in the reflection, and I was like, well, you know, there's actually another person in our class who has outed themselves as polyamorous, but also, just so you know, me too. And the next week when she came to office hours, she said, Dr. K, you spoke to our class about how important it is for you to be out as disabled to make sure we knew that we had space for us to be out as disabled. And you spoke about the importance of being out as queer, you know, because it's important to see that queer people can succeed, right? And be who they are. So she said, what's wrong with being polyamorous that you're not willing to share that with people? Sorry, I get really, and it, you know, like, of course, the first thing I was like, well, let me explain the tenure process to you and how conservative UM regents are. But it really hit me. And so I just low key started dropping it in conversations. Like my other outness, I'm like, heck yeah, I'm autistic. Like, frack yeah, I'm queer. But this, I just kind of started like sliding it into spaces. So, you know, when I did an introduction, I would be like, oh, between my two partners, we have 4 cats. Or, you know, I rescue cats with my partners. It wasn't all cat centric, but much of it was, likely, knowing me. And I realized that some of my colleagues assume when I say my partners that they are research collaborators or community partners, that it doesn't click for them that they are my romantic relational partners. But it was such a weight after that conversation off of my chest to be able to say these things. And so I don't know if it ever has to be this either or issue. I feel like there's a lot of smooth ways where you can kind of start having the conversations and planting seeds without like putting on the flashing lights and like this is who I am. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And then when we went to take a road trip down to visit my mother last year, I said, by the way, I also have another partner. Their name is Allie, and they're coming with me. And like, if you want me here, like, this is what it looks like, is it's the 3 of us coming down. And what she said, I didn't expect this, but she said, you know, I don't purport to understand what this is, but of course I will be kind and respectful. And then she laughed and she's like, but you have to be the one to tell your aunt. And it went so much better than I thought it would. So I was just not going to tell my aunt. And then my sister told my aunt, and she was fine with it too, which is not to say that everybody will be fine with these things. But I think about how much less joy I would have in my life if I hadn't started sprinkling that in and being clear that that was who I was. And I think that also, as people are coming out and being more open, including celebrities, about being non-monogamous or having multiple partners, I think it's not quite as much of an out there or anathema idea as it once was. But just like we talked about with outness, right? Like it's a constant shift. And so, you know, you can be out to your group of friends and your circle and even your coworkers, and maybe the family comes on the later end, and it doesn't make you any less true or authentic to who you are. You are just making the choices that are best for yourself in any given moment of time.
Be like Elsa.
Be like Elsa. Let it go.
Let it go.
This is Robbie. Thank you, Chris. Let's close today's panel out with a brief answer to this question. What do queer, disabled, or queer chronically ill people bring to social justice movements that is worthwhile? Everyone, go ahead and take a crack at that question as briefly as you can, maybe 2-3 words. And then we'll go ahead and officially close out because we are 3 minutes from time. So let's start with Tay. What do queer, disabled, or queer and chronically ill people bring to the bigger social justice movement table?
I will say that we bring representation, especially when we are in places of leadership, places of power. We bring our experiences to really dictate how we all move forward, like as people and as a society. And there's a lot of power within that. So that's my answer.
This is Ronnie. Thank you. Chris, what do we bring to the movement?
Words. If you all get a chance, look up Rustin Byron. Sorry, Byron Rustin. He's the one that wrote the I Have a Dream speech, but he's also the one that wrote many of Dr. Martin Luther King's speeches. As a queer person, and it's always weird for me to say queer because queer was a bad word when I was growing up. So, but as a person of this lifestyle, the biggest thing you can do is bring words. Sticks and stones do hurt, but words do too sometimes. So, yeah.
Thank you. This is Rami. Thank you so much, Chris. Shanna, what do queer disabled people bring to the movement?
I'm autistic, so I kept your 3-word thing very literally. Creativity, compassion, and the future.
Love that. Ashley, final word.
The main thing that I would say is education, just because I personally feel the need to educate and advocate for not only myself as a queer disabled person, but also someone else who might not have the strength to do so, in order to, lift them up and bring them into the spotlight too.
This is Rami. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, folks, we are at the end of our time today. We're going to wrap in 5 minutes. I just want to have some thank yous said out loud for folks. From the chat, the person who asked the question about polyamory would like to say thank you so much to Dr. K for sharing your experience and your story regarding polyamory. This approach of planting seeds makes a lot of sense and is something that is completely doable for me. Your impact is inspirational. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you especially to LGBT Detroit's Leadership Academy for helping put this on. A huge shout out to our panelists from the Leadership Academy, Tay Brown, Ashley Hunter, and Chris Sutton. And last but not least, a huge thank you to Dr. Shanna Qatari for their rich contributions to this evening's panel as well. To learn more about LGBT Detroit's Leadership Academy, please visit lgbtdetroit.org/theacademy, and that'll be in the chat. And to learn more about Dr. Shanna Qatari's work, visit their website, shannaqatari.com. Also, please remember to RSVP for the next installment of this community conversation series by visiting the link in the chat. That's taking place July 19th, same time. It's also a Tuesday, 6 to 7:30, with a whole new group of panelists. And if you're wondering how you can do something to support the disability community today, please visit DetroitDisabilityPower.org/DDP-aligned-CTAs, again in the chat, to get a full list of current calls to action that you can do ASAP. With all that said, happy Pride, everyone. Enjoy your evening, get some rest, water, food, take care. Hope this started your brain thinking about some new stuff. There's a lot we didn't cover, but queerness and disability is a huge world. So we hope this inspires you to go do some research of your own. Also, big shout out to ASL interpreters and CART for making this an accessible evening for us all. So thank you all, and we're gonna stop recording.